Top of the morning to you. This morning I'm off to a book launch at Hillmount Garden Centre in the Castlereagh Hills, Gilnahirk, Belfast. And this is yet another book produced, written and compiled by a local author, very popular local author, Aidan Campbell. And the book is called East Belfast and World War II. They also served, and it tells the story of what Aidan refers to as the Magnificent Seven. Seven local guys and one, or six local guys and one lady who went off to serve in the Second World War. And here's some of the pictures of the guys and lady that he's talking about. So what does he say about this book? This spoken and illustrated history is entitled East Belfast and World War II. They also served, and follows on from a series of local history books, also by Aidan Campbell, which cover areas of East Belfast, South Belfast and Greater Belfast. There has been much media coverage on the 80th anniversary of D-Day, June 6th, 2024, and more recently the 80th anniversary of VE, or Victory in Europe Day, 8th May 2025, and the end of World War II. This publication remembers the service and sacrifice of a few people connected to East Belfast, the Magnificent Seven, as Aidan calls them, either by virtue of birth, residence, or even family ties, and it tells their stories. And sadly, as Aidan said, these guys are all gone. This generation has all gone, and their stories need to be kept alive, and this is brilliant that Aidan has compiled and written this book and collected up all the photographs, the relevant photographs. This publication remembers the service and sacrifice of a few people connected to East Belfast, either by virtue of birth, residence or family ties, and tells their stories. They also served in Northern Ireland during World War II, and they were all volunteers, as conscription was not applied here. Aidan Campbell continues to give illustrated talks to local groups. Profits from the sale of these books and talks are donated to local charities and worthy causes, including the Army Benevolent Fund. And Aidan has done a brilliant job. And this book is on sale at Hillmount Garden Centre and for £10. And, you know, you're going to hear Aidan's talk, and I think, in my view, this talk should be given in every secondary school, because our young people don't know what their grandfathers and great uncles did on their behalf. And it's packed full of information, it's packed full of photographs, black and white photographs, and it's packed full of stories. And this is just absolutely brilliant. It makes it real whenever, you know, you're talking about guys and girls that people know and remember were grandfathers and great uncles and all the rest of it, and lived in places that people know as well. And this is their stories as told by Aidan Campbell.
So I'm back in the air again here. Thanks very much, Robin, for those kind words and a wee bit of background about the book. So I just want to say a few words of thanks, first of all, this morning, because doing a book like this, there's a long tail to it. It takes quite a while, about 12 months to contact people and fact check and all that sort of thing. So I just want to thank a few people. I want to thank Robin Newton, MBE there, and John McClelland is usually the sponsor, but he's away in Spain enjoying the good weather at the minute. So I want to thank everybody that has contributed to the book, and all the people with the archives and things like that have provided photographs and information. I also want to thank our proofreader, Chris Woods, who's not here today. Very important that the comma goes in the right place, on the full stop and all that sort of thing. I want to thank Prairie Press, who yet again have done a good job printing. I've had this now for 20 years. First did this back in 2005. I think Jana Moore's here today. Remember the wee room, Jana, upstairs in the Marie Curie Hospice? Well, people were packed in. That would have been back in June 2005. So I'm still doing it. I remember thinking at the time, we're doing the right thing here, writing a local history book about East Belfast. Will anybody buy it? They're still buying it. And so far, donations from the sale of all the books have reached over £198,000. So of course, it's all very well writing a book, and as Christine said to me way back at the start, so you've got the books now, what are you going to do with them? I said, I'm going to sell them. She says, who to? I says, well, I haven't really thought that part through. So the books are on sale at Hillmount, Hamilton News, Cregagh, at the Museum of Orange Heritage on the Cregagh Road. So big thanks to Robin Mercer, not here, was here earlier, staff for the tea in the room and all that. And Ian from the Tatler, Ian, are you still here? So those photographs that were taken outside there, so you might appear in the Tatler in the next edition. Raymond Anderson and Aidan Ross, thanks very much for bringing your cameras along. And I want to thank some of my drivers. Stuart McCracken, you're here, Stuart? Yes? Oh, yes?
Here.
Where are you, Stuart? Oh, no, that's it. Yes, thanks very much. Stuart, Wesley Thompson, yes, Wesley at the back there, yes? Thank you, Wesley. Adrian Ross, yes, thank you, Adrian. Tom Conway, thank you, Tom. Derek McAfee, yes, thanks, Derek. Harry Lennox, thanks, Harry. And Joe Miles, did I see Joe Miles there somewhere? Oh, there you are, Joe. Thank you very much indeed. I don't drive now, so it's very important that I'm transported along to these places to give talks. So, and I also want to thank the good wife. Remember that on the TV? This is a good wife here. That's a wee quotation actually from the Old Testament, the good wife. Christian makes lots of cups of tea and answers the telephone. So it's very important. Keep the show on the road. And the story, book number 26. So that's what I'm going to talk about over the next hour or so. But the first thing I want to say is a wee bit of humour at the start here. You quite often get these funny things on the internet now, open emails and all the rest of them. And this amused me, and I thought this had a certain resonance. And Robin was talking there about no conscription in Ireland, you say, as Winston Churchill said, tracked down his speech in Westminster back in the 1930s. No conscription in Northern Ireland, he said, Winston Churchill said, but more trouble than it's worth. Never conscription here, only volunteers. And somebody sent me this here. People nowadays, and you see somebody there, very tragic. Somebody's drowning. Help me. What are everybody doing? They're taking photographs. So somebody pointed out recently that's a bit of a change in society. We've sort of changed from a society that got involved and volunteered to do things. Now we're watching and taking photographs. So we're going to go back a wee bit in time to the society where people did things. And there's the front cover there, a man there on the front cover. Flight Sergeant Alexander Blackwell McCune, DFC, highly decorated. And you can see him there, he's going to got a determined look on his face. And so we're going to talk a wee bit about him and some of the other people as well. East Belfast there, it is there. And we're going to look at a couple of people there. There's Harry Christie and Thomas Cherry. And over around the Knock area here, we've got Alexander McKeown, Ted Ross, Bobby Porter, Bill Rutledge, and Margaret Johnson that Ron was just talking about there. But I want to do a wee bit of a back in time, just to remind us, as Robin says, the way things were, and the world we might be living in now if things hadn't gone the way they went. Here's the Belfast Telegraph. That's the 5th of September, 2 days after war was declared. The Premier was a man called Neville Chamberlain, you might remember him, and announced, "This country is now at war." It was quite a shock. And there had been quite a bit through the 1930s about the Nazis were marching around Europe, but the outbreak of war, the declaration of war, was quite a shock to many people. Also on the 5th of September, the Belfast Telegraph, the recruiting office, this is at Clifton Street actually. Remember, no conscription in Ireland. Rush at the Belfast recruiting office, which had to be closed temporarily due to the number of applicants. So overwhelmed with the number of people that wanted to sign up and do their bit for King and Country. And there you can see up at the top there, recruiting office at the top. That was in Clifton Street actually. Here's the Belfast Telegraph again. Even the students at Queen's University were getting into the act now. And this again was on the 5th of September. Belfast prepares. Queen's University of Belfast students volunteer for sandbag filling. Some of them at Belfast City Hall. So there's a lone RUC constable. I'm not quite sure what he was going to do if the Germans invaded. But anyway, there's where the sandbags ended up there at the front of the City Hall. A bit near home, Shandon Park Golf Club. Of course, very little sport played during the war, you say. No golf at Shandon Park Golf Club. So what did they do with Shandon Park Golf Club? They turned it into, a lot of it, into a firing range for the Home Guard. And I know there's some golfers here, so know this idea about in golf, taking a shot at the green. This brings a whole other meaning to it, doesn't it? So that's the Home Guard there, Dad's Army. But when the Germans came on Easter weekend 1941 and bombed Belfast, and of course a lot of the feeling was the German planes would never be able to fly as far as Belfast. That proved not to be true. There's Ballymacarrett, they're devastated. And there you can see the wee tower there of St Patrick's Church of Ireland Church at Ballymacarrett. Very badly damaged in 1941, didn't reopen again until 1951. Closed for 10 years until they raised some money and rebuilt the church. Here's another reminder, Campbell College, not too far from us. 3 hospitals hit in Belfast during the Blitz. One was the Ben Hospital in Clifton Street, destroyed. Another was the Wee Hospital, the Ulster Hospital on Templemore Avenue, very badly damaged and closed. And the third was the Military Hospital in Campbell College. So the pupils from Campbell College had all been transported up to the Northern Counties Hotel in Portrush. And then the military hospital was built in the grounds. And on this occasion, and you can see the missing huts there were 20 patients and staff killed during the Blitz. And again, not far from home, 13 Kensington Road. Well, there's a very nice development now called Kensington Chase. I think there's about 6 or 8 houses, 3 or 4 houses on the site. In the Blitz of 1941, the Germans dropped a 500-pound bomb. That's it there. Very soft ground, you say, so the bomb disposal men defused it and it lay on the ground for 5 years. And here in 1946, it was coming back up again. So took it up in 1946. It created a huge crater in the grounds, and the people that lived in the house very sensibly turned it into an outdoor swimming pool. That's a go. So lots of houses on the site now, that's all gone as well. Stormont. Let's bring back memories of your old place of work there. So Stormont, of course, was blacked out. So Stormont was built of white Portland stone, and the authorities felt it would be a sort of a magnet for the German bombers, so they blacked it out. It was blacked out with apparently a mixture of pig swill and bitumen, and blacked out. Then after the war, you say, somebody thought, right, we'll better get this cleaned up again. And then it turned out, unfortunately, the man whose idea this was, he had passed away and hadn't left the formula. And so for years and years and years, they've been trying to clean it up. And there's the trolley bus there. Of course, back in those days, back in the 1940s, most civil servants didn't have cars. So the trolley bus took the civil servants up to Stormont. So we're going to come now to the first of our, which I've dubbed my Magnificent Seven, the people who all served. They didn't have to, and they volunteered to do the bit for king and country. Here's the first of them here. Alexander Blackwell McKeown, DFC. It says there in brackets Paddy, and of course, if you're Irish in the British Armed Forces, you were probably Paddy, like Paddy Blairmain. And Alexander had gone to Sullivan Public Elementary School, and then Sullivan Upper. Quite clever, got his junior certificate. And then he got a job, a couple of jobs, and he was working for McClinton Soap Company, and then working for the Northern Ireland Development Agency, a sort of a forerunner of Invest Northern Ireland. But here he was, in 1940, he joined up. And there he is there, Alexander Blackwell McKeown. And he's wearing his RAF uniform there, but there's no insignia on it. And apparently the story goes in the family that they got a professional photographer to take this photograph, you say. This is probably his going away present. That's his dad there, that's James McKeown in the middle. And alongside Alexander's mum, Isabel. And that's her in the black and white outfit there. And James worked for a company called Barbers, who were also involved in the textile business run, as you know. And Isabella was the Barbers' housekeeper. So we're very involved with the Barber family. And that's a couple of sisters there and a younger brother. So Alexander joined up in 1940. And then, which is very important from a research point of view to books like this, data, information. So Alexander had kept, like all flyers, a pilot's flying logbook. And this was a detailed record of every day that he was in flight in the RAF, and where he was and what he was doing and what sort of an airplane he was flying. So he kept up all those records. The first entry was, after initial training, on the 13th of June 1941, he was off to Southern Rhodesia. And again, you've got to piece these things together, probably, as Robin says, a troop ship, off to somewhere like down the Med, down to Alexandria in Egypt. And then, of course, back in those days, the British Empire stretched from Egypt down through Sudan, Kenya, Uganda, and then northern and southern Rhodesia and into South Africa. Southern Rhodesia today is called, of course, Zimbabwe. That's how it changed. So here, the great thing about Alexander's records was he seems to have kept a camera and taken photographs, which is fantastic. So here we have a photograph here of a place called Gwillow. Now you can see some of the RAF officers there over on the left-hand side. And why they were going to Southern Rhodesia was for flight training. So we're getting them away from the UK down to the same place, Southern Rhodesia, to do flight training. And here's some of the officers here, and you can see some of the native children there. And it looks like a police constable there keeping an eye on everybody. You have to imagine in 1941. I mean, in these days we're used to going on holidays to places like Lanzarote, or taking easy jet off to Lanzarote, pressing buttons and things. People didn't travel in those days. And this must have been very exciting, both for the young RAF officers and also for the native peoples that lived in Africa. So what was going on with all these people arriving here? And one of the stops was a place called Gwillow. And it says Gwillow, altitude 4,650 feet. Now to give you an idea, Slieve Donard is the highest mountain in Northern Ireland. It's about 2,700 feet. So this is way up on the mountains at Gwillow. And so they're heading off to Southern Rhodesia for flight training. And of course the flight training wasn't very basic aircraft. When I know this from my business experience, I mean I trained as an accountant, the cost accountant and all the rest of it. What I often thought was, you know, you spent 2 or 3 years at the Polytech getting business diploma and things like that, and then you're off out into business and they're going to give you something important to do. And of course that wasn't the case. Well, I think my first task was to go out and get buns for the ladies to be in my office. So here they were, the young RAF men. They didn't start you off with a Spitfire or something like that. They start you off with an old string bag, First World War aircraft, like a Hawker Hind. Here's the Hawker Hind aircraft there, and that was the 26th Elementary Flying Training School at a place called Gilnahirk in southern Rhodesia. So things were going well for Alexander. He seemed to like the flying, and here was the first certificate: his air screw swinging fuel and ignition systems. So you have to imagine again, we used to press the buttons now, you know, like for the central heating in the house. But back in those days, there was none of that. You had to do it the hard way. So how the aircraft was started was somebody had to wind up the propeller. So they learned to do all those things and make sure the fuel got through. And there's Alexander's certificate there on the 27th of June, 1941. So things are going well for him. So then after a period of training, so by April 1942, it's back to Blighty, back to the UK. So here's Alexander there. And by this stage he's a flight sergeant, so he's obviously doing well. He's been promoted, he's got a rank now, and he's there with a lot of other colleagues at Advanced Flying Unit number 3 in a place called South Cernay in the UK. And this is now April 1942. So then the next thing was by September, after a bit more flight training, and of course the flight training experience was in a lot of aircraft, from single-engine aircraft to multi-engine aircraft, through fighters to bombers. And here's Alexander there with 3 members, 3 colleagues. That's him there. And he was with 252 Squadron. Now 252 Squadron was founded in Aldergrove. So they were a local squadron, and then they were posted here out to Egypt in September 1942. And of course, there was no living in hotels there with air conditioning and central heating. They lived in tents. So again, you have to imagine, and we'll come to that a bit later in the story, out to places like Egypt, and you're living in a tent where there's probably mosquitoes eating away at you and things like that. So this is the world that we're in, but to put up with all that sort of thing, to fight the enemy and fight for democracy. Now, a wee bit of the bigger picture. So the Second World War was still underway, and just about that time, so we're now approaching the Battle of El Alamein. The Battle of El Alamein was won on the 11th of November 1942. So Alexander's out in the war zone there, and here we have here a newspaper clipping: British troops entered Tripoli. So British troops are entered Tripoli, and the man on the right there, that's the bagpiper. So a lot of bagpipers leading the battalions as they went forward. And that's a tank there called a Churchill tank. Winston Churchill, and named after Winston Churchill, of course. Churchill said, before El Alamein we never had a victory. We only had a defeat. After El Alamein we had no defeats, we only had victories. So this is regarded as a turning point in the war from Churchill's point of view. And Churchill said in the early years of the war, the Churchill tank was named after him when they found out it was no damn good. That was Churchill's thinking at the time. If you've been up to Carrickfergus of recent times, if you head out of Carrickfergus, the castle behind you, you're heading out toward Kilroot, you'd probably notice on the left-hand side there's a memorial garden of the Churchill tank. Don't know if you've seen that or not. Now here's the quiz question. Does anybody know why a Churchill tank is on display in Carrickfergus? Well, we read the book, you'll know. Because Harlan Wood made them there. The Churchill tanks were made by Harlan Wood on Carrickfergus in the factory there. And that's why the Churchill tank lived today. So, the war's moving on. And here's what the newsletter said then. That Paddy McKeown of Hollywood, one of the heroes of a daring raid against German forces, for which he was awarded the DFC, a very high award, a very high military award for bravery, for flyers. The citation says, for an act or acts of valour, courage or devotion to duty whilst flying in active operations against the enemy. So these people were putting their life on the lines. And that's the DFC for many minutes. Now, the plane that Alexander was flying was a bullfighter when he won his DFC. And the bullfighter was a Bristol bullfighter, so it's full name. It was a very heavily armed aircraft. It had cannons and nose and it carried bombs as well. And so it did a lot of damage, particularly in ground attack. Attacked ground troops and airplanes on the ground, and also shipping. And there we can see there the mascot. There nearly always a wee dog or a goat or something in these photographs, and that's the mascot there for 252 Squadron. Now we can see up there, this nice old photograph there, that's a bullfighter there. So by September 1943, of course, after El Alamein, the Germans have now retreated into Italy. But still in all, supplies have to be sent by ship to resupply the troops. And there's some German shipping there, and there's a bullfighter that's bombed. Now you can see the splash marks there. Looks like it just missed the ship. But in Alexander's flight log, there are quite a few of these episodes as well. By 1944, he's back to the UK, back to Blighty, and that's a troop ship there. And in his flight log, of course, he's doing coastal duties round about the British Isles. And he mentions places like Long Kesh, and of course that originally was an RAF base, better known now as the Maze, where the prison is, and of course Langford Lodge, where the Americans had a big assembly plant for American bombers coming in. And that's near Aldergrove, and Alexander was there as well. Alexander's last log entry was on the 18th of February 1946. Now, we know the Second World War ended, and I heard this on the radio there recently. VE Day was in May 1945, VJ Day was in August, but a lot of people weren't demobbed until the following year. So Alexander's last log entry was the 18th of February 1946. At that stage, he was a flight lieutenant. So he'd been promoted again. When he came back from the war, he'd been very much involved in rugby. And there's Alexander there. At this stage, he was playing for Sullivan Upper Old Boys First 15. Now that's now better known as Hollywood Rugby Club. You can still see it when you go down the dual carriageway. The club's still there. And another wee story in the records, of course, is whenever he was given his payoff from the RAF, he used a lot of the money to buy new team colours and things like that, and to help with the development of the rugby club. Alexander got married, came back and got married to Sally Mulwiney on the 26th of July 1952 at Ballygilbert Presbyterian Church, which is on the way down to Bangor. And then they had a family of four daughters, two of whom are here this morning. Frances and Helen, isn't that right, Frances? Yeah. And as Robin says, for men like Alexander that had been in war zones, coming back to a peacetime routine must have been quite a challenge. When your life was on the line and you're dodging the enemy and a lot of your friends have been killed, what are you going to do? So Alexander came back and had an ordinary job, but he also got involved in fundraising, as I can't do here this morning. And here we have a nice photograph here from the press in 1955, briefing for Wings Day. That's Alexander there on the right-hand side. At the RAF Association's offices at Royal Avenue, Mr. A.B. McKeown, DFC, from the Stormont branch. And of course, the McKeown set up home at Knock, where the family home stayed. Bobby was in the Dundonald Home Guard, and then later on he was 4th engineer in the Merchant Navy. He was in Gilnahirk Men's Group. Anybody here from Gilnahirk Men's Group this morning? Any present members? Oh, look at all those hands get up. Or former members, yes. George and Harry, do you remember Bobby and the Metro? We used to sit with a wee group of school teachers on the left-hand side of the hall there. Remember that? Very nice man. So, Bobby's father, George, was a butcher. And had a butcher shop at 127 Newton Arch Road, not too far from Westbourne Presbyterian Church. And George had been in the First World War. He had actually lost a leg. He had a wooden leg, apparently. And they had the butcher shop there anyway. The family lived up around the Cregagh Road, the top of the Cregagh Road near the rugby ground. So that was George Porter's butcher shop. There was a wee story in the family. I think that George would have liked Bobby to be a butcher, but Bobby had other ideas. Bobby was in the Home Guard. He was a teenager at this stage. And there's a nice picture there from the Dundonald Home Guard. And I've looked at this a few times. I want to draw your attention to two people. So that man there, and then this man here. So that's the Home Guard. And of course these are all volunteers as well, working men. And that looks like they're a military officer. And he's probably given a very important lecture about very important things like when the Germans invade, what are we going to do? And sometimes these lectures went on for a long time, people were taking them seriously, but look at the man on the right there. He's got a look on his face a bit like, I'd rather be somewhere else. And the man on the left is looking away off in the distance, and he's probably thinking, what am I having for my tea tonight? So I've surmised all that, but you can sort of draw those inferences from the photographs. So Bobby had joined the Home Guard. When he was in the Home Guard in the Blitz of 1941 that I just referred to, and there's one of the hospitals there, that's the wee hospital at Templemore Avenue, and the Ulster Hospital has been reincarnated, that's at Stormont now, and that was very, very badly damaged. Another building that was very badly damaged was the Methodist Church on Newton Arch Road, and that was destroyed. That's now the site of Skenos. And so Bobby was then moved, like a lot of young men, to go and do his bit for king and country democracy. So then he joined the Merchant Navy, and he was in a ship called the Empire Cougar. And the Merchant Navy, as part of the Merchant Navy, the Empire Cougar was involved in Atlantic convoys. The Atlantic convoys sailed from Greenland down to Sierra Leone in West Africa. And you've probably seen a few films like The Cruel Sea. The Cruel Sea was a film, and that's Jack Hawkins, well-known British actor there in the 1950s. And Nicholas Montserrat had been at sea as well, so he was talking about his experiences. And quite often his experiences, the things in the book, Bobby talked about some of these things as well. So sometimes you're looking at films and you think to yourself, I wonder, is this a bit of Hollywood here? This is real. So next time The Cruel Sea comes on the TV, think of Bobby Porter. Here's what Bobby Porter said when he was reminiscing. They were in a convoy SL 125 from Britain away down to Madeira, just off West Africa. And they were attacked by a wolf pack, as they were called, of U-boats. So maybe the convoy had 40 or 50 ships in it. The German U-boats would get into the convoy and start sinking ships. Bobby said, I knew that I had very little chance of survival in the engine room. That's where he was. The chances were minimal of being rescued in the North Atlantic during the winter. When a ship went down, it was terrible. Sometimes they sank inside 8 minutes. So imagine if you're in the engine room down below, 2 or 3 flights down, hit by a torpedo, you wouldn't have time to get out. So Bobby talked about a number of these things and the shock of it, and of course in the film The Cruel Sea, which Bobby talks about as well, the convoy couldn't stop. He couldn't stop the rescue survivors. You had to keep moving, otherwise you become a target yourself. So Bobby was at sea for a couple of years. Then he was discharged, and there's his discharge book. So continuous certificate of discharge. And it says in the book, of course, it says general conduct very good. So a bit like Margaret Johnson's conduct there that Robin talked about. So Bobby's conduct very good. Bobby came back from the war. So what was he going to do? Well, he got married. And there he is there. It's a wedding day. That's in 1947. And there he's marrying a lady there called Betty Leckie. And of course, Bobby and Betty were great members of Albert Bridge Congregational Church down at the bottom of the Woodstock Road. Bobby then went on to have a teaching career. Now, he taught in a wee town called Glascar, which is down near Rathfriland in County Down. And just by a strange coincidence, I was talking to Bobby one time at the men's group years ago, and Bobby said, was your father down in Rathfriland? And my father was in the Church of Ireland, the clergy of the Church of Ireland. And I said he was. How did you know that? And he says, well, I used to meet a Reverend Campbell on a committee to do with education. He said, I've met your dad. So I thought, that was a bit like the old song from the First World War. Lloyd George knew my father knew Lloyd George. So, you know, Northern Ireland's a small place, isn't it? So Bobby went on, and after Glascar, then he gets promoted up to Gilnahirk. And there's a newspaper article there from 1961. And that's a wee boy there called George Best. The other lad there, that's Eric McBordy. Bobby was vice principal at Gilnahirk Intermediate School. And of course, the story about George Best, well told, very clever lad, went to Grosvenor High School, didn't like it because they didn't play football, they played rugby, and then he transferred to Gilnahirk. And I said to Bobby, did you teach George? And he says, yes. And I said, did you teach him to play football? He said, no, I can't take the credit for that one there. So that was Bobby Porter there. Now there's Bill Rutledge. Of course, Bill was a sergeant in the Pioneer Corps. And he had signed up at the age, he was a bit older than a lot of them in their early 20s, late teenagers. Bill was 29 years of age. Now, D-Day was on the 6th of June 1944. Bill wasn't at D-Day, but it's a D-Day plus 4. So that meant he was there on the 10th of June. And he was in the Pioneer Corps. And the Pioneer Corps was, let's say there, yeah, was the Pioneer Corps for men of 30 to 50 years of age. So the Pioneer Corps wasn't like frontline fighting soldiers. The Pioneer Corps sort of followed the front line as they went forward, and they tidied up after them. So they would have tidied up munitions and burnt out vehicles and casualties and things like that. So that was Bill's job, and he was there on D-Day plus 4. He was in Northern Europe for a couple of years. A very bad car accident in 1946, and then was blinded. And then he spent a bit of time at St Dunstan's. And St Dunstan's, the idea of St Dunstan's convalescent and a care home was to teach blinded ex-servicemen some sort of a role in society so they could be useful and have a job. It's now known as Blind Veterans UK. Bill then started a wee shop at 367 Woodstock Road. And that's Bill there wearing the dark glasses along with wife Sheila and his daughters Daphne and Lucinda. Daphne and Lucinda, are you here today? Put your hands up there. Don't be shy now. And you can see in the window of the shop there, it's the Festival of Britain year, and that's the King and the Queen. Festival of Britain 1951, and of course, Festival of Britain, the Ulster Farm and Factory Exhibition at Montgomery Road in 1951. And it's now work units in a very nice restaurant. What Bill did after the war was, he was involved with Remembrance Day in Belfast. And there he is there at the cenotaph. I think that's Mr. Macaulay of St Dunstan's. And Bill was there laying the wreath at the cenotaph. in 1949. And Bill died in 1980. Now Margaret Johnson, we've heard quite a bit about Margaret Johnson there from Robin, and of course Margaret was in the WAF, the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, and became a sergeant. Now she was 19 years of age when she joined up, and I was very taken with Margaret's war diaries. Now in the front row here, of course, is Margaret's daughter Hilda, and Hilda's been very kind with supplying information about Margaret. And I found out a few things about Margaret. And as I read through the war diaries, I really started to work with Margaret. I thought she had great observations on what was going on around her. As Robin said, you know, a young lady from very well educated from a good home, and what had shaped her. Of course, Margaret went to a school called Richmond Lodge School. And round about them, and I went to Methody, and that was on 1 Malone Road. And I remember the young ladies from Richmond Lodge, they had a blue uniform. I used to get the bus for her up the Malone Road, and they came down past Methody as we get on. There were lots of these girls' schools around the Malone Road. There was Ashley House, I think it was a green uniform. And where's Daphne? Daphne, Princess Gardens, was it? Yeah. Princess Gardens, just remember that? Victoria College? All those girls' schools. In East Belfast, of course, we had Bloomfield and Strathern. So lots of these small ladies' grammar schools about Belfast in those days. So Margaret went to Richmond Lodge School, and then she signed up in 1941 and enlisted. And there's Margaret there, probably very smartly, probably in her new uniform, and it looks like the family pet dog there behind Margaret outside their house down in Lurgan. Now, Margaret kept a war diary. This is not, I have to say, Margaret's war diary. I saw this on the internet and I thought this was quite appropriate actually. My war diary, Margaret Johnson. I have left Northern Ireland for West Cregagh. We sleep in large huts. There are all sorts of people here. And that sort of sets the tenor. And again, you have to imagine the way back in the 1940s, people didn't travel. And this must have been quite exciting to go over to a place like West Cregagh, which is probably around Liverpool somewhere, and meet all sorts of people. And then Margaret was on a troop ship called the Britannic, and not the original one, which was a sister ship of the Titanic. This was later, the name was recycled. And by the 11th of June 1944, Margaret's away off to Egypt. And Margaret was a WAF plotter. So you might remember this from some old war films. The young ladies with these large poles here are moving about the location of airplanes round about boards. And I saw a thing on TV recently about American aircraft carriers, like the USS Eisenhower and things like that. And apparently these aircraft carriers that carry all these fighter planes and things like that, they still have this technology in their planning room on board the aircraft carrier. Because there are planes taking off, planes coming into land, planes coming up in the air, and apparently the story is they can't take the risk of the computer going down. Now if you've got a computer in the house, you know like just sometimes out of the blue it switches off. That's all very well when you're sitting at home. If you're managing an aircraft carrier and you've got planes in the air, that's not going to work. So they still have apparently like these WAF plotters on the aircraft carrier. Anyway, back to Margaret. So Margaret kept a lot of information, kept quite detailed diaries about her travels through the Middle East there and Egypt. And I just want to read a couple of things here from Margaret's diary. So in June 1944, we arrived at Port Said, which is in Egypt. A funny town with quite modern buildings, lots of beautiful trees, although the local people never seemed to wear shoes and they all looked filthy. My first train ride in Egypt was from Port Said to Cairo. Nothing but heat and dust. When we stopped at a station, or rather a station halt, we were pestered by native children. They can be described in one word: filthy. In fact, that is the only word that could describe Egypt, or at least the parts of it that I've seen. Right, and you'll love this observation here. The women here do all the work, while the men lie about under palm trees fast asleep. Just like home, Darren, isn't it? I'm going to move on here. Margaret had a diary entry on the 15th of August 1945, and as some of you will know, that was VJ Day, Victory in Japan. Here's what Margaret said, her observation about this. It's hard to believe that there's now peace on earth again, peace on earth. At least there will be no more slaughter and heartbreaks. All the people have to do now is to try and win the peace. No easy job. And those words were written in 1945. So, discharged in April 1946, quite some time after the war was over. Margaret said her diary, I had a typical medical examination this morning, as I ought to be going home next month. There are riots in Cairo against British troops. Riots in Cairo against British troops. The Army Board Secretariat, the head of the British troops out there, was attacked and surrounded. There was a general strike as well. No trams, no taxis, and no shops open. What a country. So those were some of Margaret's observations there. I thought they were great. So, Margaret, as she was discharged from the RAF, here was her WAF character. Very good, a willing and keen worker, adaptable and reliable. So she's got a good stand off there. So you have to imagine that you're in the armed forces. If you didn't keep your nose clean, that was going to be written down as well. Not a great reference for an employer. But Margaret did very well. And there was Margaret there, yes, as Robin said, they married, and there she's married David Johnson. Now, she was Margaret Johnson, Johnson with a T. She married David Johnson with no T. David also was in the RAF, and he was a flying instructor for Spitfires, for pilots and Spitfires. And that was them getting married. They're outside the Church of Ireland Parish Church in Lurgan. Apparently, the internet tells me, the largest Church of Ireland Parish Church in Ireland. Next church is a cathedral. This is one of the very largest parish church in Ireland. Now, Harry Christie. Harry Christie was very highly decorated. Harry Christie was a wee bit older, as you can see there. So he was 27 years of age whenever he joined up. Now, changing the subject there, that's the Ravenscroft Cafe at 2 Ravenscroft Avenue, just under the Hollywood Arches. And why am I showing you this? Because just next door there at 2A was Harry's father's butcher shop. And the shop was probably downstairs and the family probably lived upstairs. Obviously things weren't usual, people didn't travel as much. And a bit like Alexander McKeown, Harry was a clever lad, went to school, and he went to a school called Mount Pottinger Public Elementary School, Paulette Avenue. And this would have been Harry's generation here. George Busby, yeah. George, is there some of your family in here?
Uncle Billy, back row to the left.
Back left? Was that your Uncle Billy?
Billy, working the Northern Bank.
So, Mount Pottinger Public Elementary School had a very good reputation. It's closed now. A very good reputation. It was very good educationally for getting children through the qualifying test and things like that, to get them moving on to better schools. So Harry is very clever, but moved on, and then he went on to Methody, my old school. And there we can see there, went to Methody, and then after Methody went to Stranmillis Training College, and then joined up, and then came back as a school teacher to Strandtown Public Elementary School. So he would have been a teacher there in the 1940s at the time this photograph was taken. This photograph here is an organisation called the B Specials, which my grandfather was in, Billy Walker. He came back from the First World War, understood armaments and things like that, joined the B Specials. There's the B Specials there. Lots of these photographs on the steps of Strandtown Public Elementary School, probably because there's a great backdrop with these steps for photographs. So he was there. He's not in the photograph, but he was there at that time. So he joins up, then he's at the Battle of Catania. So the Battle of Catania was in Sicily. That was in 1943. So after El Alamein, the Allies were moving up to Sicily and then to Italy. As Churchill famously once said, the soft underbelly of Europe. And then as he later said, but it turned out to be the tough old gut, because the Germans put up quite a resistance to the movement of the Allies forward. So there's a German Panzer tank there. And here we've got here some of the British troops fighting their way forward. So they made progress anyway, and for an act of bravery, Harry was awarded the DSO. So that's second after the BC, very high award, and that was for bravery there. For outstanding courage and leadership, that was the award, and that was the medal there. And that was awarded and presented by General Montgomery of Montgomery Road and Castlereagh Road. And there's Montgomery there. Now here's another quiz question for you. So Montgomery, first quiz question. What was the occupation of Montgomery's father?
Reverend.
Who said that? You're quite right. In the Church of Ireland. And then he was Bishop of Tasmania. My father was erected in the Church of Ireland, but I have no military experience whatsoever. So who's the man over on the left? Who is it? Yes, Basil Brooke, yes. Lord Brooke, the Prime Minister of Northern Ireland. So there was Monty there, up doing about a handshaking at Stormont in 1945, the hero of El Alamein. Now, here's what the Belfast newsletter reported here. It says, Captain Henry James Christie, DSOMC, the youngest son of Mr. and Mrs. Christie, has been killed in action. So as the Allies fought forward in Italy, I think it was toward the Gustav line, which the Germans fought every inch for, and Captain Christie, Harry Christie, was killed in action. And she was awarded the Military Cross, another, probably a third level gallantry award. He was awarded that, the DSO and the MC awarded that posthumously. Very sad day. So there's the Military Cross there. Harry also went to my old school. Now, we weren't there at the same time together, obviously, but Harry went to Methody as well before he went to Stonmillis. And Methody was at the 1 Malone Road. And of course, Richmond Lodge was at 85, so that's where we used to see the very nice young ladies from Richmond Lodge getting the bus into town with us. Harry also gets a mention on a couple of rolls of honour, and actually a few. This is one here from Stonmillis College where he gets a mention there. And here's one from Mount Pottinger Presbyterian Church, and Harry gets a mention there. As also does Thomas James Cherry, who's the next person I'm going to talk about. Oh, thank you, sir. This is Thomas James Cherry here. Thomas James Cherry was a gunner in the Royal Artillery, and he joined up 27 years of age. I think we've got Thomas's son here. Where are you, George? Yes?
Oh, yeah.
That's your dad there. So he joined up at 27 as a gunner. Thomas had married Martha Allen in October 1939. So this is just after the outbreak of the Second World War. Of course, back in those days, no mobile phones, no internet. When people went away to war, and you didn't hear from them for years. You didn't know if they were dead or in prison or what was going to happen. So here's Thomas and Martha here. married at Mount Podger Presbyterian Church in 1739. And there's Mount Podger Presbyterian Church there, as you can see. That photograph there was probably taken about the 1930s. You can see the overhead tram lines. And a wee bit of history again I was reading about was, and apparently as the trams went past on a Sunday morning, there was quite a racket. And then there was talk about writing to the Belfast Corporation to see if they could make it trams quieter on a Sunday morning, so people could hear the sermon, all that sort of thing. So those were the days. Those were the days. Thomas was in the 8th Belfast Heavy Anti-Aircraft Regiment of the Royal Artillery. Now, they were based down at Sydenham, at a place called Clonavon, which there's still a military base there. And that's the standard heavy anti-aircraft gun. That's a 3.7-inch heavy anti-aircraft gun. And Thomas was at Dunkirk. And he was one of the ones that was saved. A lot of their equipment wasn't. Thomas was saved, taken off from Dunkirk. And then, of course, no British troops in Europe from early 1940 until 1944. Then the regiment was sent off to fight the Japanese out in Burma. And there's Thomas there at Burma. And you can see in the background there, it looks like he's riding a donkey. It looks like some sort of a Burmese temple in the background. Probably a day off there. So that was on the VJ Day, came a bit later, that was the 15th of August. But also, you can imagine out in Burma, very soft ground, and quite often the elephants were used to ferry things round. There were tanks and lorries and things as well. On very soft ground, quite often used elephants. Thomas was demobbed in 1946, along with a lot of the people we've seen there. And he also kept his paybook. His paybook is quite good because, again, there are details about his military career. And he's described as this: honest, sober, truthful, and reliable. Growing report, isn't it? Thomas went on then. The Cherries then set up home in the Cregagh estate. And Thomas got a job in the city hospital in the laundry. And then he became the laundry supervisor. The Cherries lived at Burn Way, 2A, which is just up at the end there. And we know this is 1966 because Kilbrony House is under construction on the left. That's now up for demolition. And there's a man called George Best. George the Best lived at 16 Burn Way. And I was very touched. You know, I think it was during the Ulster Workers' Coalition strike. It was 1974. There were no buses on the road. And of course, Thomas used to get the bus or the trolley bus along the Cregagh Road over to the city hospital. No buses on the road. What did he do? He walked to work. Still sick people in the hospital. The laundry still had to be operated. And Thomas walked to work in the city hospital. Like the old soldier he was. Devotion to duty. Devotion to duty. Now, where's Carol Dalzell? Right, Carol. Uncle Ted, right? There's Uncle Ted here. Another member of Gilnahirk Men's Group, a very faithful member. I always remember Ted in church at Gilnahirk Presbyterian Church singing in the choir on a Sunday morning. A very nice man, a very gentle man. And of course, Ted had joined up at the age of 17. I mean, my grandson's nearly 15. And I just think of him as a schoolboy. And Ted wasn't very far off this. Ted was from Liverpool. He was brought up in the Blue Coat Orphanage because his father had died when he was quite young. And along with his, five brothers and sisters, yeah, in the Blue Coat School. And there we can see there, Ted was a radio operator direction finder in the RAF, because you can see the insignia there on his right arm. So I'm going to jump ahead a wee bit. We don't know very much about what Ted was doing during the early 1940s, but by 1943 he was in Gibraltar. So that was another British outpost of empire, the Mediterranean Sea. So Ted was in Gibraltar, and there's Ted there, along with two colleagues at Gibraltar. So we're listening for German signals and things like that. Now, Ted was involved in receiving radio signals, and he received a radio signal one day. And the radio signal purported to be coming from a crashed aircraft. But Ted was well versed in radio signals, and Ted thought, this is not a crashed aircraft here. This is coming from a seaborne vessel. So he went to his commanding officer and he reported this. And again, I'm making this up now, but I imagine the conversation with someone like this. So Ted reported it to the CEO, and the CEO probably said to Ted, Ted, this is on a need-to-know basis, and you don't need to know. Dismissed. Now, this bothered Ted for a number of years. And he had this in the back of his mind. And here in 1956, he was at the cinema. And he saw a film called The Man Who Never Was. And you might have seen that cinema, that film. It was Cliff and Webb, a couple of other people, and also a man called Stephen Boyd, or as he knew him in Glen Gormley, Billy Miller, that was his real name, Billy Miller. And this was about a deception plan. And Ted thought, that's it. He said, I was there, I remember all this. But of course, great secrecy back in those days. They didn't tell you anything, he just told you what you needed to know. And what the deception plan was, after the Allied success at El Alamein, you said, so the clever clogs in British intelligence, they wanted the Germans to think that the invasion of Europe was going to be via Greece and not Italy. That was the story. And here's one of the men here involved in the plan. Who's that?
Ian Fleming.
Who's Ian Fleming? So that's Ian Fleming, that of course wrote the James Bond books. He was involved in military intelligence in those days. He may well have been one of the men behind Operation Mincemeat, for all I know. And what Operation Mincemeat was about was very simple. Take a cadaver, a dead body, and what you do is you chain a briefcase that's wrist, and it's full of important papers. They're giving the impression that the Brits are about to invade Greece rather than Italy. And put this in a submarine, send a signal that was supposed to be coming from an aircraft, but it's really coming from a submarine, which Ted figured out, and put it in the sea off the coast of Spain. Now, as I say, Spain was a non-combatant country, but Spain was a fascist dictatorship. The dictator was a man called Franco. And the British often regarded, and you can read this in the book as well, Franco was regarded as being very sympathetic to the Germans. So probably what would happen is the briefcase would probably find its way from the Spanish into German hands, which did happen. And information after the war was that, yes, indeed, the Germans did move troops over to Greece before the invasion of Sicily. So Ted gave himself a pat on the back for figuring a lot of this out. And of course, what happened for many years was Ted and people like him working in military intelligence signed the Official Secrets Act. But really, in the last number of years, a lot of these official secrets were relaxed and information was come forward. And there's me there with Ted. Away just about 10 or 11 years ago, there was quite a bit in the media. You see books and films. Operation Mincemeat, which was the operation, and The Man Who Never Was, that was the film. And Ted was invited out to a men's Provost Club in Lisburn. And Ted said, he said, will you be my navigator to go to Lisburn? And I said yes. So went off to the men's Provost in Lisburn there. Ted gave his talk, and there's us holding the books up. By Ted Ross. So what did Ted do after Gibraltar? Then the next thing was he was transferred to Yugoslavia. So as the war was moving on, and then he was fighting with Tito's partisans in Yugoslavia. And Yugoslavia, dodging the Germans, Ted had a few close calls, dodged the Germans, and here we have them there. So what they were doing in Yugoslavia was, well, they were using elephants out in Burma and Yugoslavia here during the snow. They were using donkeys to carry supplies around. And there's Ted there with a colleague. Now, some of you might remember a man called Val Doonigan. Do you remember Val Doonigan? Delaney's donkey? They were pulling it, pushing it, shoving it and shooting it. And I've looked close at this photograph and the men have got smiles on their faces. So I'm probably imagining they're probably saying to the donkey, or the mule, as stubborn as the mule, get up, get up. So they're all trying to get it moved out there. And so Ted had quite a few close calls out in Yugoslavia. After the war, he was at Gilnahirk wireless station, the secret listening station, and he was there in the 1950s. Spent a bit of time over in Finland, listened to the Germans, a bit of time in Persia or Iran, listened to the Russians. So Ted was very well informed about all these things. And my memory of Ted always is in the choir at Gilnahirk Presbyterian Church. Here's Ted here. And again, this was part of my childhood memory from St Matthew's Church of Ireland in the 1960s, on Remembrance Day. It seemed like just about every gentleman in the church had a chest full of medals. That generation's all gone now. So here's Remembrance Day here in 2000. That's Ted Ross there with his medals. The lady to the left, as we'll look at Ted, that's Margaret. What was Margaret's second? Margaret, I think, was a wrench. She got medals. She was a sister of a man called Ronnie Carroll, used to be a singer. And I remember Margaret putting her military training to good effect. She always at the wee desk taking the money of people coming into Gilnahirk Men's Group, or not the Men's Group, the ladies' group. Sorry about that, Margaret. The man to the right, that's Billy Dunlop. He's got an even bigger chest full of medals than Ted. Billy was also in Atlantic convoys, George.
Yeah.
And Billy was the man who was sunk. And as he was got down with a ship, he thought this is the end. And then he was brought up with a surfer to the surface by an air bubble, an air pocket. And he thought, I'm safe in the cold Atlantic. George Johnson to the far right, the founder of Gilnahirk Men's Group, he was on the Queen Mary during the Second World War. And they were going across the Atlantic, dodging the U-boats in the Atlantic, bringing celebrities and troops back over to Europe. Now, that's really the end of my talk. I've just touched on a few stories there with people. Thank you very much to everybody that helped me out and contributed all these stories. Great to have all this information, all this research, actual research. The book's now on sale if you haven't got a copy, only £10. All profits to the local charity. The books are on sale here. Don't tell Robin Mercer. They're also on sale at Hillmount at Cregagh and the Museum of Orange Heritage. I am available for talks if you're in a group anywhere. I'd like to hear the talk. And I just want to finish on this note. My military experience. Here it is. I was in the Wolf Cubs. I was a section of the Wolf Cubs. And that's me there outside St Matthew's Church of Ireland. Just at the top of the Shankill Road back in 1967 on a put there on the march. And I have to say, back in those days, you know the days when most of the gentlemen in the church had a chest full of medals, we seemed to do a lot of marching about back in those days, even in the Boy Scouts and the Wolf Cubs. And flags, waving flags and all sorts of things, very unpopular these days, waving flags. And of course the BB band tooting away as we marched down the Shankill Road. So that was me there. Very, very good training for life. Very good training for life. And that is definitely, yeah. Thank you very much.